The bell had not yet finished quivering when the room decided it understood the boy. Chalk dust hung like a thin fog over 30 faces and one torn collar, and in that sliver of cloth the class found a story they had rehearsed before. Musa stood in the doorway with his exercise book pressed to his ribs, edges splayed from rain. The teacher's gaze found the rip, then the shoes, foam slippers patched with twine, and the ledger on her desk turned a little toward him as if it, too, wished to appraise. "Uniform," she said, the word clacking like a latch. "And the PTA levy? No badge, no desk." A ripple of laughter came from the back row, a practiced sound that hid the old ache of being relieved you were not the one chosen. Musa shifted. His breath caught behind his lips, and the door behind him seemed to grow heavier. On the wall above the blackboard was the school motto, hand-lettered in blue: Discipline et avenir, a future paid in receipts. The fee schedule pinned beneath it listed line items that never showed up on the ministry site: compliance, maintenance, security. The ledger on the desk, green cloth fraying at the corners, bore a column named irregular, the principal's word for children who arrived in shoes that told the truth. The teacher, Madame Khadidia, tapped the book with her red pencil and said the line she always said because the system had taught it to her: "If we let you in, others will follow." Out the window, beyond the courtyard gate, where a guard in a faded blue shirt checked badges with a bored thumb. The street breathed traffic and heat and the market's argument about tomatoes. Every resistance in the room, laughter, the ledger, the motto that had become a fence, formed a tidy gate, and behind it sat the official explanation for everything. The principal's office held the key. There were forms for exemptions, the teacher explained in a tone that made the form itself a verdict. "Take the form, go to the bursar. If he stamps, we talk." The door creaked as Musa began to withdraw, the class already returning to the copy exercise, tracing a geography of rivers none of them had ever seen. A courageous insider, the school matron named Salimata, who had fixed more shoes than fevers, lifted her eyes from the corridor bench and watched the boy pass. She had seen other doors close like this, and each time she filed away a name and a date on scrap notepaper, she kept folded into her apron pocket. A private ledger of refusals that had taught her what the tall ledger on the teacher's desks did not say. The bursar's door was open, but the man behind the metal grill worked like a port official, sliding receipts across a counter that kept his shirt ironed and your voice small. "Exemption?" he asked, not looking up. "The principal signs first." The principal's door was shut. The secretary's bangs and lacquered nails signaled a different kind of policy. "If you don't look like trouble, I can ignore you." Musa stood with his form and the weight of a school day he was not allowed to carry. And outside the courtyard gate, the guard checked another badge and waved the student through with a tilt of head that felt like a kindness, only because everything else was a gate. Back in 4EMB, the teacher resumed the lesson on civic duty. She drew 3 boxes on the board, labeled citizen, state, responsibility. The chalk squeaked and broke, a small white bone against the black. When the door shifted on its hinge, everyone glanced up out of habit. Latecomers were spectacle, and spectacle was something the room understood. Salimata had left her bench. The principal's shutters flicked open. A rumor moved faster than the bell could. Someone important had stepped into the courtyard. Breath went out of the room and did not return. Even the ledger seemed to hold still, as if a page were about to be turned that the book had not known it contained. And in the doorway, where boys like Musa learned to become weather, a new shadow fell across the threshold, and the room recalibrated its silence. The courtyard gathered children like a basin gathers rain. Salimata stood just inside the gate, as if willing her body to be a hinge that could swing both mercy and protocol. She had slipped Musa a sachet of water and a quiet instruction, one that had saved more mornings than any circular from the ministry. Breathe first. Then ask again. Across the way, the bursar closed his grill with a soft, decisive clack that sounded like a rule finding its voice. He had the look of someone who believed accuracy was the same as justice, and that the ledger's green cloth gave him authority that outlasted dust and elections. Musa's second attempt at the principal's door went no better than the first. The secretary read a WhatsApp message and smiled at a joke from a parents' group, a thread titled PTA Champions, where receipts were photographed and posted like pilgrim badges. The requirement that relief had to pass through the principal's pen was not written on any official sheet, but it lived in habit and in the hush that collected around that door. "He's in a meeting," she said, eyes still reading. "Come back after first break." Outside, the sun had begun its methodical climb, and the gate guard watched a boy with a new backpack walk in with the easy posture of someone who could assume a desk was waiting. The class in 4EMB moved on to a reading about national unity while a desk sat empty, which is how systems perform their neatest tricks. The narrative said that rules kept order, and order made learning possible. No one asked whose learning was protected by denying it to one child. A tall man in an ill-fitting suit, an inspector, someone whispered, or perhaps just a cousin of one, paused in the corridor and peered through the door glass, judging from afar what should have been judged up close. Madame Khadidia softened when she spoke of ideals, but hardened at the specifics of this boy, because the school had trained her to value abstraction over breadth. Her salary depended on things the PTA could help buy, and the PTA's appetite for control had grown around fees like coral around a shipwreck. It was not corruption, she would say if asked. It was maintenance. By the time the first break came, Musa had learned to be invisible. He sat on the concrete step near the water tap, flipping through pages of an exercise book filled with careful letters as if writing could summon the door to open. A cluster of students played a game thrumming with laughter that was not cruel and therefore made the cruel laughter from earlier seem more deliberate. In the shade, Salamata thumbed her folded notepaper and considered whether to escalate her private ledger into the light. She knew what it cost to speak. Once, a guard had been moved to the back gate for letting in a boy without his badge, and the boy's mother had thanked him with mangoes the school would not let him keep. There was always a gate and always someone stationed at it who carried too much blame and not enough authority. Then the PTA chair arrived, a woman whose bright scarf and brighter voice transformed corridors into parade routes. "We have standards," she announced to anyone who might be in earshot, though her eyes sought the principal's shutters. "This is not a charity." The word charity fell like a slap on the water of the courtyard, leaving ripples that reached the tap where Musa sat. A few parents nodded because it looked like leadership, and the gate guard straightened his shirt. When a community voice speaks with a ledger behind it, even silence agrees. The principal emerged from his office with a measured smile and the kind of belt that says both discipline and distance. "Order is love," he liked to quote from a faded poster in his school days, and he said something like it now, gesturing toward the fee schedule that had become a totem. "Without order we cannot teach." He took the PTA chair's hand in a clasp that turned into a conversation just out of reach of those without badges. The bursar reopened his grill, secure again in the knowledge that the system's door stood firm. From the street, a small convoy turned in through the gate. It was unmarked and unhurried, not the theatrical arrival used to frighten as much as to signal the state's size. People recognized the gait before the face. The leader, who had lately walked dusty clinics and broken registries, who had been seen listening more than speaking, who wore the country like a responsibility rather than a coat, stepped out of the second vehicle. He was not here to inspect. He was here because he had been sent a message by a truth-telling aide who followed community groups as closely as budgets, and because the school was a door, and doors are where you learn who you are. The courtyard arrested its own breath. The leader did not perform the pause. The air did it for him. He greeted the guard by name, as if the uniform and the man were separable, and the guard's shoulders lost the tightness they used to pretend to be iron. The leader did not ask for the principal first. He asked for water. In the ritual of asking for water, a room measures itself. Who fetches, who allows, who waits. Salimata rose instinctively, sachet in hand, her apron's pocket rustling, the private ledger a whisper against authority. The leader took the water, thanked her, and asked if there was a child waiting by a door. Madame Khadidia felt her voice split, one part rehearsed respect, one part unyielding habit. She stood in the threshold of 4MB as the leader raised his hand in greeting, and the children rose as one, scraping chairs in a collective chord that made the ledger on her desk vibrate. He scanned the room, saw the empty desk as if it were an individual, and looked to the chalkboard's triad: citizen, state, responsibility. And which door kept a citizen out? He asked, but like all good questions, it sounded like an invitation rather than an accusation. He did not glance toward the principal. He kept his eyes on the chalk, the door and the breadth of the room. Musa remained near the tap, because shame is a faithful jailer. The truth-telling aide, Awa, had already seen him, thin wrists, a neat knot in the twine at his sandal, and brought him forward with a gentleness that did not make spectacle of kindness. The leader did not touch the boy's head, or hold his shoulders for the camera that wasn't there. He crouched, so his eyes met the child's at horizon. "What is the lesson today?" he said, letting the boy skip the story of the door by entering through a different one. "A civic duty," Musa managed, as if the words might disqualify him once more. "Then let us practice," the leader said, rising with the unshowy grace of someone who understood that power must kneel before breath. He walked into the classroom without asking permission from the ledger. He did not sit in the teacher's chair. He stood beside it, half in shadow, as if remembering that authority should accompany rather than occupy. "We have a sequence problem," he said, still glancing at the chalkboard triad. "We have been billing before breathing." The sentence looked simple, sounded soft, but it drove a wedge between habit and reason. He asked a few questions. Only children answer well. What does a door do? When is a door cruel? When is a door kind? A boy with a backpack that creaked like a new book answered that a door is kind when the person on the other side is not afraid of being seen. The leader nodded, not at the poetry, but at the precision. The principal joined the doorway with a prepared expression, the PTA chair just behind him clutching her scarf like a warrant. The leader greeted them, thanked them for order that keeps a school from collapsing into noise, and then placed his palm lightly on the ledger, as if checking its pulse. "This book is our mirror," he said, and the teacher flinched because she knew mirrors hurt when used properly. "If it shows that we have priced dignity, the fault is ours, not the book's." He asked the bursar to bring the stamp. He asked Salimata to bring her notepaper. He asked the class to lend their eyes, because the first audit is attention. While the stamp clacked in his hand, the leader did something that would later seem obvious. He drew a single line beneath the word irregular and wrote in a thin, unfussy hand, "Door to desk." "We will measure minutes," he said, "from the moment a child arrives at the gate to the moment a child is seated with a pencil and a chance." He wrote 2 more words, simple like the first rain after Harmattan, "treat first." He placed the stamp down on the ledger and, without ceremony, put his signature under the new column header. The stamp left the faint smell of ink and the promise that rules could be reordered without blood. No one was dismissed or humiliated. The leader moved Musa to his desk by walking with him, not in front of him, and the class saw the trick. Authority can constitute a door or become a hand that opens it. He turned to the teacher and used the voice reserved for colleagues who must be kept. "You keep much with little," he said, and she let go of the posture that had protected her from admitting pain. "Help me keep the sequence right." Outside, the courtyard exhaled. The bell rang late, but no one minded. For once, time had been kept by breath rather than brass. In the days that followed, the school learned that exposure is not a camera, but a ledger turned toward light. Awa, the aide who trafficked in facts more than in favor, set up a table under the neem tree with a stack of blank forms and a sign handwritten on cardboard. Complaint, question, thanks. No seal, no fee, and a small box labeled SLA that made the bursar raise an eyebrow and then lower it. The leader's instruction had been crisp enough to make the bureaucratic mind sigh with relief. Audit what exists, name what hurts, and give every artifact the work it was made for. In the bursar's office, the grill opened to 2 auditors with soft shoes and hard eyes. They did not speak of theft. They spoke of sequence. They asked for the last 6 months of receipts, and the bursar produced them with an air of vindication that softened as the day wore on. What they found was not scandalous in the way newspapers like. It was ordinary in the way a door that sticks is ordinary until you need it to open in a fire. There were line items that had accreted like silt, where permission is slow to arrive. Uniform compliance fines collected in cash and handed to a treasurer who made no report to the district. PTA security fees used to hire a cousin for the gate when the ministry allocation was late. A maintenance top-up levied mid-term without a circular, accompanied by a WhatsApp message in the PTA Champions thread that read, "Small sacrifice for standards. Dear parents," accompanied by emojis that made the request feel like a picnic. Screens were scrolled, screenshots taken, dates lined up like testimony. The principal's office held boxes of circulars in chronological stacks, the bureaucratic equivalent of ballast. On top, a ministry memo that clearly forbade conditional access tied to uniform status. It had been signed 2 years earlier and discussed in a meeting where the minutes recorded the phrase "sensitize stakeholders," which is a way of saying we will talk and then go on. The auditors found a neat table of student exemptions, many of them unsigned because the principal's pen had run out of ink in a symbolic distribution of scarcity that satisfied no one and harmed the same few. Salimata's folded notepapers came out of the apron and into the light, her neat dates and names forming a counter-ledger the school had not known it kept. Denied 08 under 05. Wept 811. Returned 940. Still denied. Asked for a chair. Sent away. Owa built the first dashboard on a whiteboard scrounged from the storage room, the one that smelled of varnish and nostalgia. She divided it into 3 lines with black tape. Door to desk minutes, denials, last 24H, complaints resolved. A small clock was pinned above it like a throat. The class prefects were instructed how to count by the leader himself. Start the moment you see the gate touch a hand. They wore their small authority with reverence. By noon the first day, a pattern spoke itself aloud. Denials ramped up when the bursar returned from tea, which meant that the social engine and the mechanical engine were coupled. When the PTA chair visited, door-to-desk minutes doubled. When Salamata stood by the tap, with her apron visible, they dropped. The exposure was merciless and kind in the same breath. The auditors did not accuse. They drew lines from policy to practice, like a teacher connecting rivers to their tributaries. They placed the ministry memo beside the fee schedule pinned on the wall and let silence do its work. They pulled up the PTA champions thread and read aloud the message where a parent bragged about a child's discipline in reporting irregular classmates. The room flushed. The guard, who had been reduced to a gate with a face, testified without self-pity to the impossible choices he had been asked to make. Wave in the neat and delay the torn. Translate an instruction given softly in the office into a hard refusal at the gate. Awa wrote another column on the whiteboard almost casually, as if the room had already granted permission. Perverse incentives. She listed them with the economy of a nurse writing vital signs. Fine equals revenue. Badge equals access. PTA praise equals pressure. She drew arrows that pointed to the same wound. The leader came only once, in the evening when the courtyard felt like the inside of a shell and chalk dust loitered in the cooling air. He stood before the whiteboard, read the numbers as if they were names, and tapped the space beneath complaints resolved where the anxiety of the day had prevented anyone from writing a figure. This must not lag, he said. Truth that waits is a truth that dies. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He placed the ministry memo on the wall beside the fee schedule and asked the principal to read the first clause again, slowly, as if reading could be a ritual of repair. The principal's tongue stumbled on the word unconditional. The room, for once, listened as though listening were the first payment it owed. Reform landed not as thunder, but as a spelling lesson written in clean letters that everyone could repeat. The leader named it while standing under the neem the next morning, because names matter and a law without a name travels badly. First bell protocol, he called it, and then he gave it a subheading as plain as bread. Teach first, bill later. The school gathered, not in an assembly that performs, but in concentric circles of role and responsibility, and he moved through them without new furniture or a microphone that would make his voice an event. He held up the ledger like a sacrament, pointed to the fresh column, and taught the system how to breathe again. The simple rule came with a public face, the whiteboard converted into a proper board, laminated by the carpentry students from the technical wing. 3 KPIs sat there in sturdy silence. Door-to-desk minutes updated every break. Denials, last 24H, written by the prefects in a hand anyone could read. Complaints resolved ticked at day's end with the satisfaction of a chore crossed off. A QR code printed in black and white linked to a WhatsApp line managed by Awa and 2 volunteer parents, where messages were acknowledged within 1 hour and resolved within 24. The SLA box now a promise rather than a dare. For the first week, the box was a tremor of complaints. By the third, it contained more questions and a few thanks that Awa pinned to a corkboard not as praise but as proof that strangers are watching. The perverse incentives were banned with the grace of replacing rather than scolding. Uniform compliance fines were outlawed outright. The PTA's appetite redirected into a small dignity fund, seeded by the district and topped up by a voluntary market round each month, in which sellers donated a portion of tomatoes, rice, shoe repairs. The bursar's pride, a brittle thing that had chipped the first day, was tempered with a new task he could love, tracking the fund on an open ledger separate from fees, posting weekly summaries on the same board that hosted the KPIs. The gate guard's role was rewritten in plain language, welcome, not ward. He still checked badges because identities matter in other ways, but he learned to check eyes first. He was given permission to wave a child to class and to inform later, to treat breath as currency spent before paper. Training arrived with the embarrassing simplicity that makes drills stick. The leader called it breath before words. Every adult in the school practiced it under a canopy of laughter that hid relief, a 10 count before responding to a child, a hand placed lightly on the door jamb to remind the body what a threshold is for. Madame Khadija, who had grown cautious because the ledger had made her so, led the drill on the 3rd day and found that her sentences came out better when she earned them with silence. The principal, given a role that did not make him king or ghost, ran a weekly culture check where one story of a gate opened was told in under 2 minutes, one artifact was reviewed for accuracy, and one small habit was set for the coming week like a stone laid in a path. There were no plaques. There was the whiteboard and a school that began to move without jerks. Enforcement wore a quiet uniform, too. The auditors returned unannounced twice in the first month, not to punish, but to keep the promise warm. They asked 3 questions, always the same and always enough. How many minutes from door to desk? Who was denied and why? What did you change after that? They checked the WhatsApp line, answered a few messages themselves to learn the friction in the system, and left notes the school could use immediately. Where a refusal could not be explained by policy, a warning was written. Where a refusal echoed a pattern, a district memo followed, specific, brief, and unafraid of naming. Prosecutions were not needed here. Exposure had already remade the incentives. But one vendor who sold counterfeit badges in the alley was handed to municipal authorities, and the briskness of that handover made the PTA thread go quiet for a week. By the end of the month, the numbers on the board spoke a new language. Door-to-desk minutes hovered below 3 for the morning rush, and below 1 at midday, the prefects competing gently. For once, a competition no one had to lose. Denials, last 24H, sometimes ticked up when rain carved the street into rivers, but the explanations were as public as the figures. Complaints resolved averaged at 23 hours and then dropped, because habit is faster than fear once it starts running. Moose's presence in 4EMB was unremarkable, which is the highest honor a reform can bestow on a child. The class's laughter changed register. It was still young, still unkind at times, because youth is practice, but it no longer rehearsed cruelty as policy. The gate lost its drama. That was the victory. Morning became a pattern of hands on jams, of eyes meeting other eyes at horizon level, of the guard's greeting becoming a weather report everyone trusted. The laminated board took on the patina of use. A nick on the edge where a broom had leaned. A smudge of chalk fingerprints earned during a hurried update between bells. Alwa kept the WhatsApp line boring, which is the highest form of triumph for a complaint channel. Most messages arrived as questions now about missing pens, timetable confusions, or the mystery of a lost sweater. When a denial came, it came with explanation, and the explanation lived in policy rather than in mood. Other schools copied without ceremony. A photo of the whiteboard went from phone to phone, crossing neighborhoods like a proverb. In the registry school 2 blocks away, the headmaster asked for the template with the immodesty of a man who has decided to become clean and will not wait to be invited. The technical wing printed QR codes for 3 schools in a morning and sent a student to nail them up, the hammer beats turning into a sound the community learned to hear as reassurance. Even the market changed its rhythm a little. On the first Saturday of each month, a small table appeared under the neem with a jar labeled Dignity Fund, and tomatoes and coins slid in with the same gesture, neither charity nor compulsion, a habit. Monthly culture checks became a kind of liturgy that did not demand incense, just attention. The principal grew into the role he had been pretending to occupy for years, steward rather than bouncer. He learned that unconditional did not mean unmanaged. He read the ministry memos aloud now without stumbling, a man teaching himself the language of the work he had chosen. Madame Khadidia's red pencil still corrected mercilessly, but her voice learned to bend first before it held firm. She found herself saying, "Let's begin more," and "Where is your receipt?" less, and the difference turned the air in her classroom from a gate to a path. Musa studied lines of geography he could now place in his own life, the street where the market bled into the road, the bend where the tap leaked into a shallow pool, and his exercise book pages stayed dry. The leader did not return for a ceremony. Reform that works does not beg for applauding hands. He received, on a desk that had learned to welcome both budgets and stories, the monthly dashboard printouts from 3 schools, a neat table that said more than any speech could. Door-to-desk minutes held steady. Denials ticked near 0 with explanations that could be taught in a sentence. Complaints resolved kept their promise and then grew too small to be interesting. He set the papers under a paperweight shaped like a door, a gift from a carpenter who had once been denied a license because the workshop required receipts he could not afford. Some nights the leader thought of the ledger's green cloth and felt gratitude for books that become mirrors when you turn them the right way. Habit is the dull drumbeat of justice. It puts the extraordinary back where it belongs, inside ordinary days. The guard now greeted children by their nicknames, and those names did not stick because of shame. Salimata still kept her notepapers, but they filled with other things: recipes, the date of Anissa's graduation, the cost of new apron ties. Hawa trained a junior to run the line so she could move to the district office and make the boredom contagious. The PTA thread learned to clap for things that mattered. The Bursar posted weekly Dignity Fund summaries with the pride of a man who had found a kind of math that nourished. On a humid afternoon toward the end of term, the rain threatened but held, and the bell rang on time. The children filed in without inspection. The door did what a door is supposed to do. Musa took his desk as if it had always been waiting for him, which in a better world it would have been. The whiteboard's numbers gleamed in the dimness, not heroic, simply there. Someone had drawn a small line under the words, treat first, bill later, and inked a tiny arrow pointing toward the classroom. No one remembered writing it. That is how cultures speak when policy has done its work. The school breathed, and the breath did not ask permission. Thank you for walking with us to the end of this story. If the gates we opened here mattered to you, help this work find the next classroom, the next ledger, the next breath. And if you liked the video, then like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your voice turns a single case into a culture, one click, one share, one quiet act of courage at a time.